Hi, I'm Phil Ball, pastor of Odyssey Christian Church in Jenks, Oklahoma. We're part of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, and we offer a non-judgmental approach to support your personal journey of faith. After the message, we invite you to keep listening for a presentation from our wonderful band. And if you want to experience worship live, we invite you to find out all the details at www.facebook.com/OdysseyCC. That's what worship, along with prayer time and communion, is about, is helping us grow spiritually, because finally that's what it's helpful. That's what goes on. We don't just come, because I know some places when you go to worship, the primary thing is you go and you do respectful things, or you do different agendas. There's just different kind of unspoken agendas that go on. But I want to be as upfront and as clear about all that stuff as I can, which for me, what my goal is to help you in your spiritual journey, or at least put stuff out there that I think is helpful, and then you get to decide whether it is or not. So I just thought we'd start the new year kind of that way, and that's what I talked about. This is humans perceiving God, and the way we're all built, I'm convinced, because of my theology, is evolved from God in over a long process of time, and that we show up with certain characteristics and components of who we are, is what it means to be human, and yet the story of faith is that we just got finished celebrating a time when God was born into human form. God was popped into the earth. And then, if you follow that story, God comes around and grows up, teaches and does all kinds of behaviors to interact with us, to demonstrate what God's values are. And then God, out of God's total commitment to nonviolent love, suffers through some things and dies, and then is raised again. And then ascends, as the creed states, ascends to, quote, sit at the right hand of God the Father Almighty, which is, an ancient 3rd century creed that not everybody hooks into, but it's part of the heritage. And then the Holy Spirit comes during Pentecost. Well, all of that are like God's gifts to us, but being able to perceive those, being able to integrate that, for me, is one of the really difficult challenges all of us face all of our life, because there are so many distractions, there's so many difficulties, there's so many fears, there's so many misconceptions. And so what I want to deal with tonight is that we're all both order and chaos in the same package, okay? And Mary Jane, in her theological gift, was good enough to make snacks out of that. I'm going to use the metaphors of left brain, right brain, and we're going to look at a bunch of that stuff, because that really dramatizes the different parts of us, a part of us being very receptive and open and artsy and creative, and the other parts of us being real linear and orderly and sequential and analytical, and just all those pieces all together. And so that's kind of who we are, is we're all that mix of stuff. And so that's my goal tonight, is to play with that mix, to say this mix is who we are, and how can that help us, and how can it help you. So I hope that what goes on tonight can help you as you move through this in your week and in your year, to be able to dance between those two pieces. Because I'm convinced that God didn't make any mistakes when God built us with all of those capacities. And we all have them in different proportions. But God had a good sense in putting all that together, so that we've got all that stuff inside of us. So I want us to work on that. Okay, next slide. So that's kind of what I'm getting at with the next one, Joe. That since God is with us, how do we perceive that? Beyond celebrations, family gatherings, that whole business. And Joe, the next thing we're going to look at is a video, so you can crank that baby up. So we've learned by trial and error that we have to impose order. And our culture has learned that. After all these trillions of years of social chaos, we've begun to try to learn how to operate with some degree of discipline and order and sequence, so that there's just not chaos everywhere all the time. And so that's really a great gift, and that's really kind of a left brain activity. and I think our culture, probably in my mind anyhow, is more dominated by left brain order and rationality than it is the right brain creativity. But those kind of things all come with reality that God is best perceived by both of them, but particularly right brain senses of things in my life. Because I grew up, and for whatever, as we call the genetic roulette that we all have, or is that the right word? When the roulette wheel goes around and you know what kind of package you get. I got a very ordered, sequential thing, much like my mother, dagnabbit, that's very sequential, and it took me living with Diana for a while for me to get clear on that there were other options. And, there were other ways to do stuff besides just these sequences, and that possibilities could happen outside of those. And I really began to believe that for me, and that's why I said I can't say this is for everyone in here, but for me, allowing God to work in nonlinear ways in my life has been such a blessing. And for somebody, if you are a person who lives in constant chaos because you're constantly in right brain, it may be helpful that God adds sequence. And that's where I think God has provided some rules and order and stuff for people that are always, doing destructive behaviors. And, that they're always outside doing crazy stuff everywhere and that kind of stuff. And then for some of those people, all the rules of the church have been helpful in providing structure. And that's why I say it's both. And tonight, you guys get to decide what's your gift. And so I want us to try to open ourselves to all of our abilities to perceive Emmanuel, or God with us, as we go through this. Okay, is there a word that stuck in your brain as you watched through all that, or is there a word or phrase that just came that you want to get said? And I'm not going to say 5 of you. Just I want to give you a chance before I take off. Anybody? Word, phrase? I've seen this 6 times, and I'm still seeing new stuff. Say? Choice. Okay, good work. Anybody else? Word or phrase? More. Good job. Okay. Anybody else? Intentional. Good job. Okay. Well, let it process, because this is an art form, and while I believe it to be a very honest, accurate representation of an experience she had, it has to roll over you, and that's why I've seen it so many times. And I'm a person who rarely watches a movie twice, but there's so many implications to it. And like I confessed earlier, in my life, it's been getting out of my sequence and into allowing God to do what I call sideways thinking for me, rather than just going in a linear or straight line, and allowing myself to go sideways. And that's one of the reasons why the phrase this came to me when we started Odyssey, was where Christ leads life's adventures, because I just see life being an adventure. Even though you try to organize it, even though you try to structure it, even though you try to do the best you can at keeping it in some degree of where you want it to go, it gets blown up all the time. It just, for all of us, just gets blown up. And so I think that our society, though, we've begun on the other side of, if you're a history person like I am, you're clear that life has been chaotic for most of human history, and we've begun to learn to manage and control it. But I think in doing so, especially with our scientific attitude, we've not allowed the ephemeral right side to dance very much sometimes. And so what I say is we've learned not to trust our right side because it gets us in trouble. Y'all like it? I got to read this to you. We tore out of the drive and he peppered my tailgate. What was I thinking? Oh, I knew there'd be hell to pay, but that crossed my mind a little too late, because I was thinking about a little white tank top sitting right there in the middle by me. Hello. I was thinking about a long kiss, man, just got to get going where the night might lead. I know what I was feeling, but what was I thinking? Okay, that's a right brain moment. Okay, and I think, that Dierks Bentley in this country song dramatizes those things, and those are the stuff that you get into, and you look back on and go, those are the things that really lock into your memory. Those right brain kind of events, in a sense, because you just feel everything. And I hope that you've had some of those right brain events in your life where you just were part of everything. You felt the sense of everything. I have that experience more in nature than anywhere else, but it makes for a very memorable, exciting, amazing, wonderful kind of a time. But also it can be very painful based on whatever's going on. But our intuition is a strong right side thing, and it's taken me a long time to learn to listen to my intuition. In some of the things that I've been educated with, there's a whole process that our whole body has feeling perceptors. There was a woman who was a research scientist who was trying to figure out what part of our body was the receptors for recreational drugs like cocaine and stuff like that, because she was working in a big research lab trying to figure out how to block those receptors so that you could manage people who were addicts from a chemical, if that makes any sense, from a chemical side, so that she could put things in there that blocked those receptors so that the chemicals would not affect her. And what she figured out was that every cell in our body was a feeling cell, every one of them. And so that when we have an uneasy feeling in our stomach about something that's happening around us or some kind of a thing, there's a reason for that. See you. Oh, baby time. Okay. All right. And when that happens, and it's there, and our intuition is there, and we have those ability to sense, like Ms. Taylor was talking about. We have that ability to give that voice to our intuition. But what I want to say is both sides are God's sides. And this piece of artwork up here, I thought did a really nice job of illustrating it, where a right side is all that color and all that kind of stuff, and the left side is all the science and control and order. And I've also heard in brain science that males generally have a cart path between their left brain and their right brain, and females have a superhighway, which is why they can do multitasking more frequently. I mean, just biologically, that's part of what they're dealing with, and I think that's helpful to understand in terms of gender difference, so I feel like that to perceive Emmanuel with us requires both sides of our brain. And yet there are feelings in the traditional church, and I have to say that's kind of where I've come from. And in the traditional historical church, there are folks who know about faith, and they know about God, and they know about Jesus, and they are left-brain dominant people of faith because they have this rationally dominated religion. And in my opinion, that's somewhat safer, although it doesn't really address what I understand faith to be. Because what I understand faith to be a both and, so that you have faith. It's an experiential piece. It's not just an intellectual piece. It's a left and right brain side. And you know God because of a relationship. And you know Jesus because of a relationship. And that's been abused too, to where the Christian church and some of its things would, that all I want you to do is have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Well, fundamentally, that's important. But when you get hammered with it all the time, it becomes like, don't talk to me about that in those languages. But the point is to have us know faith and know those relationships and get a sense after who these characters are. And I'm hoping over the next 5 weeks we'll learn more about how that we can have a feeling relationship with God as well as a thinking relationship. And that's one of the gifts of prayer. And we're going to, I think, trying to be focusing on that during Lent. But it's like prayer enables you to have that conversation, and that's the reason I continue to try to get y'all to do walking, talking prayers. You tell God about all kinds of stuff. It doesn't have to be formal. It doesn't have to start off with any certain language, and it can involve expletives. Okay, because if that's who you are and that's how you communicate with God, it's important to have that knowing part of it, so that God has given us all these sides, that God is a both and God, not an either or God. And so I just want us to try to do that. And so the last thing I want to leave you with is an art form, and that we did like 4 or 5 years ago. We went through this movie, Chocolat, because it did what I consider to be a very wonderful job of showing you with a story the kind of dynamics that I've been trying to describe here, where this small village, I think it was in France, managed nicely, excuse me, by an orderly, rational mayor who was not a jerk. He was just trying to be in control. And then all of a sudden, one day in church, that was very ordered and rational and everything, a gust of wind blows open the door. And about 15 minutes later, a chocolate lady, woman that makes chocolate, and her daughter come rolling into town, and they're both dressed in red. And they began to create this explosions of life. And what I call this strong feminine opens up the shop making spirit chocolate. She wouldn't have called it that, but that's what it was. Bringing love, transformation, and some degree of chaos to this orderly life. And I think that in all of our lives, that can be our story at some level. And so that's just an art form that tries to lift up the Messiah in our lives. That's an art form that tries to do that. And I want you to look for those art forms. I want you to look for this in your life. That's what my whole goal for this sermon is to try to encourage you to be sensitive to all that, what I call the dance that goes on. You don't ever get rid of that tension. You always need order and you always need spirit. The tension will always be there. But you live in it. And sometimes you choose this and sometimes you choose that. And that's okay. And you allow all of it to happen. But in the midst of it all, I would like for you to be willing to risk a little chaos in order to expose yourself to new adventure. It maybe not go so far as the proverbial two rednecks driving down the road in a pickup truck, one of them driving, saying to the other one, "Here, hold my beer, I want to try something." It may not be quite that much, but it would be in the direction of, I want to try something that I haven't done before. Maybe this is the year you want to try something. I know some of you are already doing things like that. So to get a little bit closer to the edge, to allow God to happen to you, to get sense of that, knowing that you can get back in control. It doesn't have to be total chaos. And I'm going to read just a little piece of a thing that I read in today after I'd written my sermon. And this comes from a lady named Stephanie Paulsell, who is the daughter of a disciples clergy years gone by that was real important in overall disciple history. But she teaches at Harvard, and she went to a ordination of a new a pastor for the church, the university church at Harvard. Believe it or not, Harvard has a university church. And in that process, she made this statement in reflecting on it. In the Gospels, Jesus never seems to tire, of inviting those he encounters to experiment with their lives. Sell all you have, he tells a rich man, and distribute the money to the poor. Become like a little child, he tells his disciples, so that you can enter the kingdom of heaven. Put out into the deep water, he says of Simon Peter, and let down your nets for a catch. Charles Adams, retired professor of ethics and ministry at Harvard, calls to that kind of experimentation. He mourns the fact that we often do so little with the possibilities of our humanity and encourages us to live as if the boundaries of our lives lie much further out than we think, set not by our own anxieties and our own fears, but those boundaries, allow them to be set by God. We can do so much more than we can imagine, he tells us. We can do what God imagines for us. Let us pray. Dear Lord, as we do come to this year, we have a great adventure in front of us, and we know that you're leading the way, that you're pointing in directions that we might go, experiments that we might try. And we know that you'll be with us even if we make a wrong step and have to back up, or we get into something that we didn't know about and it hurts us. And we know that you'll be there to lift us up and help us move forward. And we trust that as we are people of faith, that we will be your partner in the creation of life. And we give you thanks. Amen.